Hello, my name is Jessica. I'm one of the librarians at the Loch Raven branch of Baltimore County Public Library. Thank you for joining me. Today, we're going to be talking about castles. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about castles, and then I'm going to show you how you can build a castle of your very own. When I first started thinking about this program, several questions came to my mind. What exactly is a castle, and what makes it so special? Who lived in castles and why? When were castles built and where? And most importantly, how were castles built? To find out the answers to my questions, I did a little research online. According to the website, theschoolrun.com, a castle is a type of home that was built to protect the people inside. Castles are different from palaces and fortresses. A palace is a type of home. A fortress was built to protect the people inside. Castles just took these two different ideas and put them together. So who lived in these castles, and why did they need them? Castles were built for the nobility. Kings and queens, lords and ladies, and their families. After they took over an area of land, they needed a place to live and a way to protect themselves and their possessions and their land from anyone who might want to take them away. Other people lived in the castles as well. Soldiers protected the castles, and servants cooked and cleaned and tended to the horses and did all kinds of other jobs. When were castles built? Castles were built during a period of time called the Middle Ages, which was about 1,000 years ago. The majority of castles were built from the year 1000 until the year 1500. Castles were built all over Europe, in many different countries, including Britain, Ireland, France, Finland, Spain, Portugal, and more. Some castles were also built in the Middle East and in Asia. Different countries had different styles when it came to building castles. Here is a castle in Castile and Leon, Spain. It's called Alcazar of Segovia, and it was built in the 1100s. This castle is called the Château de Vincennes, and it is in Paris, France. It was built in the 1300s. This castle looks quite different. This is Tavastia Castle, which is in Finland. It was built in the 1200s. This is one of the older castles. This is the Norman, which is found in London, England. It was built between the years 1078 and 1190. And one of the oldest, still standing castles of all, this is the Croix de Chevalier. This is in Syria, and it was built in the year 1031. Looking at all of these different castles, you know what I mean when I say that they had lots of different styles. Okay, now we've come to the part that I find most interesting, which is how were castles built? One of the most popular early styles of castle was the motte and bailey castle. This is an illustration of what it might have looked like. Early on, most castles were built using wood and earth, but eventually people realized that this wasn't a very safe way to build a castle. So they began using stone. Stone was much stronger, and it was harder to burn down a stone castle than a wooden one. Many castles also relied on nature for protection. Often they were built on top of high hills to make it easy for the people inside to see their enemies coming from far away, and also difficult for their enemies to get up the hill into the castle. Frequently, castles were surrounded by a deep ditch, which was filled with water. This was called a moat. If you'd like to learn more about castles, you can visit the Baltimore County Public Library website at bcpl.info, where you can check out our research databases and request books. Now that we know a little bit more about castles, it's time to start thinking about building a castle of your own. Here's a castle that I built. I used a large box to make my castle wall and 3 smaller boxes to build my castle keep. I used toilet paper tubes for the smaller towers at the top and paper towel tubes for the larger towers at the bottom. Whatever type of castle you decide to build, you will need some basic school and office supplies. For example, you will need a sharp pencil with a good eraser, a ruler, some sharp scissors, and maybe a craft knife, some very strong sticky tape, and some glue. I'll show you a few tricks for how I added the different features to my castle. But remember, you can choose to use whichever techniques that you like. If you choose to cover your boxes in paper, you can use any paper that you have on hand. I chose to use paper grocery bags. I cut my bags apart so they look like this. And then I used them to wrap my boxes just like I would wrap a box if I was giving someone a present. I also used the paper from my grocery bags when I made my battlement. I measured along the top of my paper and drew little lines, evenly spaced, and then I cut out the squares to make the different openings on my battlement. To make the turret roofs for my towers, I used black construction paper. I took a small bowl and I used it to trace a circle onto my paper, which I then folded in half 2 times to get this little wedge shape. I opened it up. I cut a slit along one of the folds, and then I took the paper and I tucked one of the cut edges underneath the other and wrapped it around until I got a cone shape. I taped the cone shape together like that. You might need to round it out a little bit more. And then I glued that on top of my paper towel tube or my toilet paper tubes. To attach my towers to the corners of my castle wall, I drew 2 lines on the side of my tube, about 90 degrees apart and about halfway up the length of the tube. I then cut along the slits to make a little flap. I used that flap to slide my tube onto the corner of my castle wall, like that. To make the walkway to go behind my battlement, I simply cut out the middle of the top of my large box. To make the drawbridge, I drew a door shape on the middle of the front of my box, and then I used a craft knife to cut it out. If you decide to make your drawbridge this way, be sure to have an adult around for some extra help, because a craft knife is very, very sharp. Well, that's about it. Now you know all the tricks for building your own castle. Of course, you might decide to build an entirely different castle. Maybe you'll use all those boxes to build a castle that's big enough for you to climb inside. Or maybe you'll decide to build a smaller castle using building blocks, or even Legos. So have fun, take good care, and I hope I see you soon. Bye-bye.